Welcome to the Daily Brain Podcast. We are never resistant to sharing information, and today is no exception. Our word today is recalcitrant. Okay, I admit it's a little ironic to use recalcitrant in a sentence about being open to information, right? It's like the word itself is rebelling against fitting in.
What's fascinating is that you're picking up on something really important about this word. It does have this inherent tension, this sense of pushing back against what's expected.
So for anyone who needs a quick refresher, recalcitrant basically means stubborn, right? Like a mule refusing to move, or maybe a toddler at bedtime.
That's a great starting point. It implies a defiance of authority or control. But what's really interesting is that recalcitrant isn't just an everyday adjective. It pops up in some pretty surprising places, especially in science.
Oh, it's like the teenager of the vocabulary world. Acts tough, but secretly has a nerdy side.
And you're right, it does have this unexpected scientific side. One of the most fascinating examples is the concept of recalcitrant seeds.
Recalcitrant seeds. Okay, now I'm intrigued. What makes these seeds so rebellious?
Well, you know how most seeds, what we call orthodox seeds, can be dried and frozen to store them for a long time. Think of seed banks, preserving plant diversity.
Right, like a giant freezer for seeds.
Exactly. But recalcitrant seeds, they absolutely refuse to cooperate with that process. If you try to dry or freeze them, they basically die. Their delicate internal structures just can't handle it.
Wait, so are we talking about some rare exotic plants here? What kind of plants are we talking about? Are these rare species?
Not necessarily rare, but you've probably encountered some recalcitrant seeds in your everyday life. Think about avocados, mangoes, lychees, even cocoa beans, the source of our beloved chocolate.
Wow, I never would have guessed those were recalcitrant. I always thought of avocados as being pretty easygoing. They're in everything these days.
They may be trendy, but their seeds are definitely stubborn. And, this stubbornness is actually forcing scientists to be more creative. They're having to come up with entirely new ways to preserve these seeds, which could lead to some really innovative conservation techniques.
So these finicky seeds could actually be driving some positive changes. I'm starting to see how there's much more to this word than I initially thought.
Absolutely. And this idea of recalcitrance, this resistance to change, isn't just limited to plants. We see it in other areas of biology, too, like in soil science.
Hold on, stubborn soil. I need to hear about this.
Okay, so picture this. You've got organic matter in the soil, leaves, roots, that sort of thing. Normally, microbes break this stuff down, which is essential for healthy soil. But some organic matter is recalcitrant. It just hangs out in the soil, resisting decomposition.
So even in the ground, there are things that are like, nope, not breaking down today. I love it.
Exactly. And this recalcitrance, believe it or not, has huge implications for nutrient cycling and soil fertility. It affects how well plants can grow and even plays a role in carbon storage, which is a big deal when we talk about climate change.
It's amazing how this idea of stubbornness plays out in nature. And, it makes me think about how we humans can be pretty recalcitrant too sometimes.
That's a great point. We do tend to see recalcitrance in human behavior as well, whether it's clinging to certain beliefs, resisting new technologies, or even just being set in our ways.
Okay, so we've got stubborn seeds, stubborn soil, and probably some stubborn listeners out there right now. Where else does this word pop up? What else did we dig up in our research?
Well, since you brought up stubborn humans, remember how we were talking about recalcitrant as basically meaning stubborn?
Yeah, like those mules and toddlers who just refuse to cooperate.
Right. Well, that same idea of stubbornness applies in a medical context, too. Sometimes doctors will talk about a recalcitrant case of a disease.
So that would be like if someone had a really bad cold that just wouldn't go away no matter what they tried.
Exactly. It's when the usual treatments or therapies just aren't effective. The condition stubbornly resists all attempts to alleviate it.
So what kind of conditions are we talking about here?
One example we came across was recalcitrant pneumonia. It's a serious form of pneumonia that's particularly difficult to treat often because the bacteria causing it are resistant to antibiotics.
Oh, wow. So in that case, it's like the bacteria themselves are being recalcitrant, and that makes the whole illness much harder to deal with.
Precisely. And it's not just limited to pneumonia. You can have recalcitrant cases of many different illnesses, from skin conditions like psoriasis to even some types of cancer.
Wow. So it really does cover a spectrum of resistance from tiny seeds to serious illnesses.
Yeah.
It's almost like recalcitrant is this connecting thread between all these different fields and challenges.
It really is. And, it even extends beyond science and medicine. Think about how the word is used in social and political discussions. Have you ever heard the phrase recalcitrant voters?
Not really. What does that even mean?
It's often used to describe a segment of the population that refuses to conform to the expected voting patterns or align with the dominant political ideologies.
So those who are stubbornly clinging to their own beliefs and refusing to be swayed, kind of like those recalcitrant seeds that won't dry or freeze.
Exactly. They're resistant to change, unwilling to follow the crowd, even if it means going against the prevailing political winds. And this can be really frustrating for political analysts who are trying to predict election outcomes.
I can see that these recalcitrant voters are like wild cards, making things unpredictable.
Exactly. Their resistance to being neatly categorized throws a wrench into the works of traditional political analysis, which often relies on predictable voting blocks.
It's like they're adding an element of recalcitrance to the whole system, shaking things up a bit.
You could definitely say that. And this brings us back to that irony we talked about at the beginning. We're using this word recalcitrant to describe a concept that itself seems to resist being easily categorized.
It's like the word itself is demonstrating recalcitrance, refusing to be pinned down to one meaning or field of study.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how language can be so dynamic and nuanced. So what stands out to you the most so far about this word recalcitrant?
Honestly, I'm blown away by how widely applicable it is. We've gone from seeds to politics with stops in medicine, and even a bit of linguistic philosophy along the way. It's been a true deep dive. But I'm curious, is there anything else about this word that we haven't covered yet?
Yeah, it is funny. When I first thought about the word recalcitrant, it felt kind of negative,
Yeah.
like something you wouldn't want to be. But now I'm seeing it in a whole new light.
I think that's a really important observation. Recalcitrant does have this connotation of stubbornness or resistance, which we often see as a bad thing. But as we've been discussing, it can actually be a positive force in many contexts.
Okay, so give me an example. How can being stubborn be a good thing?
Well, think back to those recalcitrant seeds. Their refusal to be dried or frozen might seem like a pain, but it's forcing scientists to think outside the box and come up with entirely new approaches to conservation. Who knows what kind of groundbreaking techniques they might develop because of these stubborn seeds.
Yeah, so it's like those seeds are pushing the boundaries of scientific innovation. Exactly. And we see the same dynamic in medicine. The existence of those recalcitrant cases, the ones that defy traditional treatments, forces doctors and researchers to push the limits of medical knowledge. They have to come up with new therapies, explore alternative approaches, and ultimately expand our understanding of how to heal the body.
It's like those stubborn illnesses are pushing the medical field forward, almost like an unintentional catalyst for progress.
That's a great way to put it. And this idea even extends to the social and political realm. Remember those recalcitrant voters we talked about? They might be unpredictable, but they also bring diversity of thought and challenge the status quo. Their presence can prevent stagnation and encourage new ideas to emerge.
So in a way, a little bit of recalcitrance is actually essential for growth, whether it's in science, medicine, or even our own personal lives.
I would absolutely agree with that. It's a force that shakes things up, pushes us out of our comfort zones, and ultimately helps us to evolve and adapt. It's a reminder that sometimes resisting the easy path can lead to unexpected and valuable discoveries.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I have a whole new appreciation for the word recalcitrant. But before we wrap up, what's one final takeaway you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
I'd encourage everyone to think about where they encounter recalcitrance in their own lives. Is there a habit you're struggling to break? A problem that seems impossible to solve? Or maybe even a belief that you're holding on to really tightly? And then I want you to consider this. How might that recalcitrance actually be serving you? Is it challenging you to grow, pushing you to be more creative? Or maybe even protecting you in some way?
That's a great point. It's like a reminder to look for the hidden value in those things that seem stubborn or resistant. Maybe there's a lesson to be learned or an opportunity for growth that we haven't considered before.
Exactly. So next time you come up against something recalcitrant, don't just get frustrated. Take a moment to appreciate the power of resistance and see what you can learn from it.
That's a fantastic challenge for our listeners to ponder. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the world of recalcitrant. Until next time, keep those brains engaged and don't be afraid to embrace a little healthy resistance along the way.